The satisfying crack of an open palm, striking a 6-year-old girl's legs, echoed through the cabin of Flight 2247. The child had been asleep. She had been sick. She had done nothing wrong. But Gerald Hutchins, a 57-year-old man in a pressed suit and polished shoes, decided that a sleeping child's foot brushing his seat was enough reason to reach forward and hit her with full force. Maya screamed. Her mother, Diana, lunged from her seat, shaking with a fury only a mother protecting her child could feel. And the flight crew. They looked away. Every single one of them looked away. But what Gerald Hutchins did not know, what no one on that plane could have possibly predicted, was that this moment would destroy everything he had ever built. If you want to see how this story ends, subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way through. Comment the city you are watching from so we can see just how far this story travels. Diana Mercer had not slept in 31 hours. She stood at the bathroom mirror in her small apartment in Atlanta at 4 a.m, pressing a cool washcloth against her daughter's forehead. Maya was 6 years old, and she had been running a low-grade fever since the previous afternoon. Her little body was warm to the touch, and her eyes, normally so bright and full of mischief, were glassy and tired. "Mommy, my head hurts," Maya whispered, her small fingers gripping the edge of Diana's shirt. Diana knelt down and brushed the hair from her daughter's face. "I know, baby. I know it hurts, but you're going to be okay. Mommy's got you." Diana was a pediatrician. She had spent 10 years treating other people's children, and she knew that Maya's fever, while uncomfortable, was manageable. A viral infection, nothing that required hospitalization, but the timing could not have been worse. Today was the day they were supposed to fly to Charlotte to see Diana's mother, Ruth, who was recovering from hip replacement surgery. Ruth was 71 years old, lived alone, and had no one else. Diana had promised she would come. She had promised Maya would come. And Diana Mercer did not break promises. She picked up her phone and dialed her mother's number. Ruth answered on the second ring, her voice thin but steady. "Diana, it's 4 a.m. Is everything all right?" "Maya has a fever, Mom. I'm thinking about whether we should still come." There was a pause on the other end. Then Ruth said, "How high?" 100.4. "It's been hovering there since yesterday." "That's nothing, sweetheart. You know that better than I do. Give her some children's Tylenol packs, some extra juice boxes, and get on that plane. I need to see my grandbaby." Diana smiled despite herself. "You're supposed to be the one resting, Mom, not the one giving medical advice." "I've been resting for 3 weeks. I'm tired of resting. I want to see Maya's face. I want to hear her laugh. That's the best medicine there is." Diana looked down at Maya, who had crawled onto the bathroom mat and curled up into a ball, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. The child looked so small, so fragile. But Ruth was right. The fever was low. Maya was uncomfortable but not in danger, and Ruth needed them. "Okay, Mom, we'll be there. That's my girl. Now get some sleep, both of you." Diana hung up and carefully lifted Maya from the floor. She carried her daughter to the bed and lay down beside her, pulling the blanket over both of them. Maya's small hand found Diana's and held on tight even in her sleep. They arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport just after noon. The terminal was a wall of noise and motion, and Maya pressed herself against Diana's side, overwhelmed. Diana kept one arm around her daughter and the other gripping their carry-on bag. She had packed light, a change of clothes for each of them, Maya's medications, a coloring book, crayons, and the stuffed rabbit that Maya refused to go anywhere without. "Are we going to see Grandma?" Maya asked, her voice barely audible above the crowd. "We sure are, sweetheart. Grandma can't wait to see you." "Is Grandma still sick?" "Grandma had her surgery and now she's getting better, but she needs lots of hugs to help her heal. Think you can handle that?" Maya nodded seriously. "I can give really big hugs." "I know you can, baby." They found their gate and settled into a pair of seats near the window. Maya leaned against Diana and closed her eyes. Diana checked her daughter's temperature with the back of her hand. Still warm, but not worse. She pulled out a juice box and a small packet of crackers, but Maya shook her head. "Not hungry, Mommy." "Okay, but try to drink a little bit for me, all right?" Maya took 2 small sips and then set the juice box down. Diana's heart ached. She hated seeing her daughter like this. As a doctor, she knew the fever would break on its own. As a mother, every minute of her child's discomfort felt like an hour. When the boarding announcement came, Diana gathered their things and joined the line. She noticed a man standing a few passengers behind her. He was tall, heavy-set, wearing an expensive charcoal suit and a silk tie. His face was set in a permanent expression of impatience, and he kept checking his watch as though the entire boarding process was a personal inconvenience designed specifically to waste his time. He sighed loudly every time the line paused, and at one point muttered something under his breath that Diana could not quite hear, but suspected was not kind. She did not give him a second thought. She had no reason to. Not yet. They boarded the plane and found their seats in the middle row. Diana let Maya take the window seat, hoping the view might distract her for a few minutes. But Maya was too tired to care about the clouds or the tarmac. She pressed her face against the cool glass and closed her eyes again, clutching her rabbit. Diana buckled Maya's seatbelt, then her own. She pulled a thin blanket from their bag and draped it over Maya's legs. Her daughter's small feet dangled just above the seat pocket in front of her, not quite reaching the back of the seat ahead. The man in the charcoal suit settled into the row directly behind them. Gerald Hutchins dropped into his seat with the weight of a man who believed the world owed him comfort. He shoved his briefcase under the seat in front of him, yanked out a business magazine, and began flipping through the pages with aggressive disinterest. He had not said a word to anyone, but the space around him already felt hostile, as though his mere presence raised the temperature by several degrees. The plane taxied and took off. Maya stirred against Diana's shoulder as the engines roared, but Diana whispered softly to her and stroked her hair until she settled back into an uneasy sleep. For a few minutes, everything was calm. The seatbelt sign turned off. The flight attendants began their drink service. Diana allowed herself a moment to close her own eyes and breathe. Then Maya shifted in her sleep. It was nothing. The smallest movement imaginable. Her foot dangling loosely beneath the blanket swung forward and barely grazed the back of the seat in front of her. Not even the seat in front of her, the seat beside the one in front of her. The contact was so slight that Diana did not even feel it happen, but Gerald Hutchins did. "Excuse me." His voice came from directly behind Diana, sharp and clipped. "Can you control your kid?" Diana turned around. Gerald was leaning forward, his face tight with irritation, his magazine folded over one knee. "I'm sorry," Diana said, genuinely confused. "Your kid, she keeps kicking my seat. It's been going on since we took off." Diana looked at Maya, who was sound asleep, her mouth slightly open, her breathing shallow. "Sir, she's asleep. She's not kicking anything." "I felt it, right here." Gerald jabbed his finger at the back of the seat. "She kicked it, and I'd appreciate it if you'd do your job as a parent and keep her under control." Diana felt a flash of heat rise in her chest, but she kept her voice even. "She has a fever. She's not feeling well. If her foot brushed your seat, it was completely involuntary. She's 6 years old and she's asleep." Gerald's eyes narrowed. "I don't care if she's sick. I paid for my seat same as you. I shouldn't have to deal with someone else's kid making my flight miserable." "She's not making your flight miserable, sir. She's sleeping." "Well, make sure she stays still. Some of us are trying to have a peaceful flight." Gerald leaned back and returned to his magazine, but Diana could feel his hostility radiating through the seat. She turned around and placed her hand gently on Maya's legs, adjusting the blanket so her daughter's feet were tucked more securely underneath. She told herself it was over. She told herself the man was just rude and that the encounter was finished. She was wrong. 7 minutes passed. Maya's fever was climbing. Diana could feel it through the blanket, the way her daughter's skin had gone from warm to hot. She pressed the flight attendant call button and waited. A young woman in a navy uniform appeared with a perfunctory smile. "Can I help you?" "My daughter has a fever that seems to be getting worse. Do you have any cold packs or ice I could use to help cool her down?" The flight attendant's smile did not waver. "I can bring you some ice in a napkin. Would that be okay?" "That would be great. Thank you." The attendant returned a minute later with a small bundle of ice wrapped in a cocktail napkin. Diana placed it gently against Maya's forehead. Maya whimpered in her sleep, but did not wake. Diana whispered to her, telling her she was safe, telling her they were almost there, even though they were barely 40 minutes into a flight that would last another hour and a half. Behind her, Gerald Hutchins let out an exaggerated sigh. Great, now the kid's sick and we're all just supposed to sit here and deal with it. Diana did not turn around. She refused to engage. She focused on her daughter, on keeping her cool and comfortable, on the rhythm of Maya's breathing. She told herself that the man behind her was nothing, a stranger, someone who would disappear from their lives the moment this flight ended. Then Maya moved again. Her body shifted as a small shiver ran through her, the way feverish children sometimes trembled without warning. Her foot twitched and caught the edge of the seat back pocket, making the faintest rustling sound. "That's it!" Gerald's voice was loud enough to draw the attention of the passengers across the aisle. "I have had enough of this." Diana turned. "Sir, she is a sick child. She is not doing anything deliberately. Please lower your voice." "Don't tell me to lower my voice. You brought a sick kid on a plane. That's your problem, not mine. And now she's kicking and squirming and I have to sit here and take it." "She is not kicking. She has a fever. She twitched in her sleep." "I don't care what she did. Keep her still or I'll handle it myself." The words hung in the air like smoke. Diana felt her stomach drop. "What did you just say to me?" Gerald leaned forward until his face was inches from the gap between the seats. "I said keep her still, or I will." Diana's hands were shaking. She turned to look for a flight attendant, but the aisle was empty. The beverage cart had moved to the back of the plane. She pressed the call button again hard 3 times in quick succession. No one came. "Don't bother," Gerald said, settling back into his seat. "They're not going to do anything. Just keep the kid quiet." Diana's jaw tightened. She pulled Maya closer, wrapping both arms around her daughter, shielding her. Maya's eyes fluttered open for a moment. "Mommy, it's okay, baby. Go back to sleep. My legs feel funny." "I know. Your body is fighting the germs. Just rest, sweetheart." Maya closed her eyes and drifted off again. Diana sat rigid, her arms around her daughter, her eyes fixed straight ahead. She could hear Gerald breathing behind her. She could hear him muttering. She could feel him shifting in his seat, restless and angry, a man who had decided that a sleeping sick child was his enemy. 5 more minutes passed, then 10. Diana began to hope that the worst was over, that Gerald had burned through his anger and would spend the rest of the flight sulking in silence. She allowed herself to relax just slightly, loosening her grip on Maya so the child could breathe more comfortably. That was when it happened. Maya's foot, freed from Diana's protective hold, drifted forward in her sleep and touched the seat back. The lightest contact, the brush of a child's shoe against vinyl. Gerald Hutchins did not say a word this time. He did not complain. He did not threaten. He simply reached forward between the seats, grabbed Maya's ankle, and slapped the child's legs with his open hand. Hard. The sound was like a gunshot in the confined space. Maya's eyes flew open and she screamed, not a cry, not a whimper, a scream of pure terror and pain. She did not understand what had happened. She had been asleep dreaming and then something had struck her with force and violence and she did not know why. Diana reacted on pure instinct. She threw herself sideways, shielding Maya with her body, and then spun to face Gerald Hutchins with a fury that burned through every rational thought in her mind. "You hit my child." The words ripped from her throat. "You put your hands on my child." Gerald's face showed no remorse. None. He straightened his tie and looked at Diana with cold contempt. "She was kicking my seat. I told you to control her. You didn't listen. She is 6 years old. She was asleep. She has a fever. Then you shouldn't have brought her on a plane." The passengers around them were turning now, craning their necks, whispering. A woman across the aisle had her hand over her mouth. A man 2 rows ahead had turned completely around in his seat. But no one moved. No one spoke up. And no flight attendant appeared. Maya was sobbing into Diana's chest, her small body shaking violently. "Mommy, why did he hurt me? Why did the man hurt me?" Diana's vision blurred with tears. She held her daughter tighter and pressed the call button again and again and again. "Someone help me. Please. He hit my daughter. Someone needs to help me." Finally, a flight attendant appeared. She was young, maybe 25, and her face was carefully blank. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to keep your voice down. You're disturbing the other passengers." Diana stared at her in disbelief. "He hit my child. That man reached between the seats and struck my 6-year-old daughter. And you're telling me to be quiet." The attendant glanced at Gerald, who had resumed reading his magazine as though nothing had happened. "Sir, is that true?" Gerald did not look up. The kid was kicking my seat. I gave her a little tap to get her attention. The mother is overreacting. A tap? Diana's voice cracked. He slapped her. Hard. Look at her legs. Look. Diana pulled back the blanket to reveal the angry red mark on Maya's shin. The outline of Gerald's fingers was clearly visible against her daughter's brown skin. The flight attendant looked at the mark, and something flickered across her face. But then she straightened and said, "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but I need you to remain calm. I'll speak with the lead attendant and we'll sort this out." She walked away. Diana watched her go, watched her disappear behind the galley curtain, and felt a hopelessness so heavy it nearly crushed her. She looked around the cabin at all the faces turned toward her, some sympathetic, some uncomfortable, some carefully looking away. "Did anyone see what happened?" Diana asked, her voice trembling. "Did anyone see him hit her?" A woman in the window seat across the aisle spoke first. She was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head. "I saw it," she said quietly. "I saw him reach forward and strike the child." A man a few rows back raised his hand. "I heard the slap. It was loud. There's no way that was a tap." Gerald finally looked up from his magazine. "Mind your own business. This doesn't concern you." "You hit a child," the silver-haired woman said, her voice rising. "That concerns everyone." Gerald's face reddened. "The mother can't control her kid. That's not my fault. Someone had to do something. Someone had to hit a sleeping 6-year-old. The man from a few rows back stood up. "That's your solution." Gerald slammed his magazine shut. "Sit down. You don't know what you're talking about." The lead flight attendant appeared from behind the curtain. She was older than the first one, with sharp features and an air of authority. She approached Diana's row with measured steps. "Ma'am, I've been informed there was an incident. Can you tell me what happened?" Diana recounted everything, her voice breaking multiple times. She showed the lead attendant the mark on Maya's leg. She pointed to Gerald. She identified the witnesses who had spoken up. The lead attendant listened, then turned to Gerald. "Sir, did you make physical contact with this child?" Gerald crossed his arms. "I tapped her foot. That's all. The mother is making a scene." "He's lying," the silver-haired woman said from across the aisle. "He reached forward and slapped the girl's legs. I watched it happen." The lead attendant paused for a long moment, as though calculating something in her head. Then she said, "I'm going to ask everyone to return to their seats and remain calm. We'll address this when we land." Diana felt the floor drop out from under her. "When we land, he assaulted my daughter. You need to do something now." "Ma'am, we are at 30,000 feet. There is limited action I can take at this moment. I assure you this will be handled on the ground." "So he just sits there behind us after what he did?" The lead attendant hesitated. "I can offer to reseat you if there are available seats." "You want to move us? We're the victims. Move him." The lead attendant's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but I need you to work with me here." Gerald smirked from his seat. Diana saw it. The smirk of a man who believed he had won. A man who believed that money and entitlement and a pressed suit made him untouchable. A man who had hit a child and expected the world to look the other way. Maya tugged at Diana's sleeve. "Mommy, I want to go home. I don't want to be on the plane anymore." Diana lifted her daughter into her arms and stood in the aisle. Maya buried her face in Diana's neck, still crying softly. Diana looked at the lead attendant, at Gerald, at the rows of passengers watching this unfold, and she made a decision. "I want to speak to the captain." The lead attendant blinked. "Excuse me." "The captain. I want to speak to the captain of this aircraft. A passenger assaulted a minor on this flight. Your crew failed to respond, and the man who did it is sitting in his seat reading a magazine. I am not going to sit down and wait for landing. I want to speak to the captain. Now." Gerald let out a sharp laugh. "The captain? You can't just demand to speak to the captain because your kid got a little tap." Diana ignored him entirely. She kept her eyes on the lead attendant. "Now." The attendant stared at Diana for a long beat. Then she turned and walked toward the cockpit. Diana stood in the aisle holding her daughter, surrounded by strangers who had just witnessed something none of them would forget. Maya's fever burned against Diana's skin. Her daughter's tears soaked through her shirt, and somewhere behind her, Gerald Hutchins sat in his seat, confident that nothing would come of this. The lead attendant disappeared behind the cockpit door, and for 30 seconds the cabin held its breath. Diana stood in the aisle with Maya pressed against her chest, feeling every pair of eyes on her, feeling the weight of judgment and sympathy and cowardice, all swirling together in the recycled air. Her arms ached from holding her daughter, but she refused to sit down. Sitting down meant accepting what had happened. Sitting down meant letting Gerald Hutchins win. Gerald himself had gone quiet. He sat with his arms crossed, his magazine abandoned on the empty seat beside him, his jaw working back and forth, as though he were chewing on something bitter. He was not afraid. Diana could see that clearly. He was annoyed, inconvenienced. A man whose evening had been disrupted by a situation he believed was beneath him. The cockpit door opened. The lead attendant stepped out, followed by a man Diana had not expected. He was not the captain. He was the first officer, a tall man in his 40s with a square jaw and calm, serious eyes. He walked directly to Diana and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Ma'am, I'm First Officer Kevin Briggs. I understand there's been a serious situation. Can you walk me through exactly what happened?" Diana told him. She kept her voice controlled, even though every word felt like swallowing glass. She showed him Maya's leg, the red mark that had deepened into a bruise, now the imprint of Gerald's fingers still visible against her daughter's skin. Kevin Briggs looked at the mark, and Diana watched something shift behind his eyes. Not surprise, anger, tightly controlled, professionally contained anger. He turned to Gerald. "Sir, I need you to tell me your version of events." Gerald uncrossed his arms and leaned forward. "Look, I'm a paying customer on this flight. The kid has been kicking my seat since takeoff. I asked the mother to control her, she didn't, and I gave the kid a little pat to get her attention. That's it. End of story." "A pat," Kevin repeated. "That's right, a pat." Kevin looked at the silver-haired woman across the aisle. "Ma'am, did you witness what happened?" The woman removed her reading glasses and set them in her lap. "I saw the whole thing. That man reached between the seats and slapped that little girl's legs. It was not a pat. It was not a tap. It was a full, open-handed slap on a sleeping child. I heard it from 3 feet away." Kevin nodded slowly. He turned to the man who had stood up earlier. "Sir?" "I didn't see it directly, but I heard the slap, loud and clear, and I heard the child scream. That sound doesn't come from a pat." Kevin Briggs straightened. He looked at Gerald Hutchins for a long moment, and then he said, "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me." Gerald's confidence cracked for the first time. "Come with you where I'm not going anywhere. I'm sitting in my seat minding my business." "Sir, based on the physical evidence on this child and the corroborating witness statements, you are being accused of assaulting a minor on a commercial aircraft. That is a federal offense. I am not law enforcement, but I am authorized to take action to ensure the safety of all passengers on this flight. You need to come with me. Now." Gerald's face went from red to white. "Federal offense? Are you kidding me? I barely touched the kid." "The bruise on her leg says otherwise, sir." "That could be from anything. Kids bruise all the time. You can't prove I did that." The silver-haired woman spoke again, louder this time. "I can prove it. I watched you do it. And if there's a camera on this plane, it can prove it too." Gerald turned on her with sudden venom. "Who asked you? Mind your own damn business." Kevin stepped between them. "Sir, you need to lower your voice and come with me. I won't ask again." "Or what? What are you going to do? You're not a cop. You're a co-pilot. You can't make me do anything." Kevin's expression did not change. "Sir, under federal aviation regulations, the flight crew has authority over all passengers on this aircraft. If you refuse to comply with a crew member's instructions, you will be restrained for the remainder of this flight and turned over to federal law enforcement upon landing. That is not a threat. That is the law." The cabin had gone completely silent. Every passenger within earshot was watching. Some had their phones out, others were leaning into the aisle. A child 2 rows ahead had stopped playing with his tablet and was staring with wide, frightened eyes. Gerald looked around. For the first time, he seemed to register that he was surrounded, that every face he could see was looking at him with something between disgust and disbelief, that the walls of the cabin, which had felt so spacious when he boarded, were closing in. He stood up. Not because he wanted to, because he had no choice. Kevin escorted Gerald to the back of the plane, past row after row of passengers who watched him walk by in silence. Some shook their heads. One woman pulled her own child closer. A man in a business suit identical to Gerald's looked away as though embarrassed by association. Diana sank into her seat, her legs trembling, her arms still wrapped around Maya. The child had stopped crying, but she was shaking, her small body vibrating with fear and confusion and the lingering heat of fever. "Is the bad man gone, Mommy?" "He's gone, baby. He can't hurt you anymore." "Why did he hit me? Did I do something bad?" Diana closed her eyes and pressed her lips against her daughter's forehead. "No, you did nothing wrong. Not one single thing. He is a bad man who did a bad thing, and he is going to pay for what he did. Promise." "I promise." The silver-haired woman reached across the aisle and touched Diana's arm. "You handled that beautifully, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Diana looked at her through tear-blurred eyes. "Thank you. Thank you for speaking up. My name is Carol Whitman, and I meant what I said. I saw everything, and I will say it again to anyone who asks. Police lawyers the president himself if I have to." Diana almost laughed. Almost. "I'm Diana, and this is Maya." Carol looked at Maya, and her expression softened completely. "Hi, Maya. You are the bravest little girl I have ever seen on an airplane, and I've been on a lot of airplanes." Maya peeked out from Diana's shoulder. "Really? Really? And when we land, I'm going to make sure that man never bothers anyone ever again. Okay?" Maya nodded and pressed her face back into Diana's neck. Carol settled into her seat, but she kept her eyes on the aisle, watchful as though standing guard. Minutes passed. The beverage cart came through again, and a different flight attendant, one who had not been involved in any of the earlier interactions, stopped at Diana's row and offered her a cup of water and a sympathetic look. "I heard what happened," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can get for your daughter? Do you have any children's pain reliever? Anything with acetaminophen?" The attendant hesitated. "I'll check our medical kit. Give me a moment." She returned with a small packet of children's Tylenol and a cup of apple juice. Diana dissolved the tablet in the juice and held it to Maya's lips. Maya drank slowly, her eyes still puffy and red, her body still trembling. "Thank you," Diana said to the attendant. The attendant leaned closer. "For what it's worth, several crew members are furious about how this was handled initially. That first attendant who told you to be quiet, she's going to have a lot to answer for when we land." Diana nodded but said nothing. She did not have the energy for vindication right now. All she had was her daughter, and that was enough. At the back of the plane, Gerald Hutchins sat in the last row, flanked by empty seats. Kevin Briggs had repositioned him there, away from other passengers, and had assigned a male flight attendant to remain in the vicinity. Gerald sat with his arms crossed, staring at the seat back in front of him. His face was a mask of controlled fury. He pulled out his phone and began typing a message. The flight attendant stationed nearby spoke immediately. "Sir, electronic devices need to be in airplane mode during the flight." Gerald looked up with contempt. "I'm sending a text to my lawyer." "You can do that when we land, sir. Phone needs to be in airplane mode." "Do you know who I am?" The attendant did not flinch. "No, sir, and it wouldn't matter if I did. Airplane mode, please." Gerald shoved his phone back into his pocket and stared straight ahead. His mind was already working, already constructing the narrative he would tell. The kid was out of control. The mother was negligent. He barely touched the child. It was a misunderstanding. He was the victim here, not them. He was a regional sales director for a national supply company. He had clients, he had a reputation, he had a golf game on Saturday and a dinner reservation at the club on Sunday. This was not going to follow him. He would not allow it. But somewhere deep beneath the outrage and the entitlement in a place Gerald rarely visited, a small voice was whispering something he did not want to hear. The voice was saying that the bruise on that child's leg was real, that the scream was real, that the look on that mother's face when she saw her daughter struck was something that would not be erased by a phone call to a lawyer. Gerald crushed that voice the way he crushed everything that made him uncomfortable. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and waited for landing. In the middle of the cabin, Diana held Maya and felt time move like mud. Every minute was a year, every sound, every shift of the engine's pitch, every murmur of conversation sent a spike of adrenaline through her body. She was a doctor. She understood the physiology of trauma, the way cortisol flooded the system, the way hypervigilance kept the body locked in a state of perpetual readiness. She knew what was happening to her, and she could not stop it. Her phone buzzed. She had turned off airplane mode for a moment when Maya was sleeping, hoping to text her mother. Ruth had sent 3 messages. "What time do you land?" "Can't wait to see you both." "Tell Maya Grandma made cookies." Diana stared at the messages and felt her chest constrict. She could not tell her mother what had happened. Not yet. Not over text. Ruth was recovering from surgery. She did not need this. Not now. Diana typed a quick reply. "Landing soon. Maya can't wait for cookies. Love you." She put the phone back in airplane mode and slipped it into her bag. Carol was watching her from across the aisle. "You doing okay, honey?" "No," Diana said honestly, "but I will be." Carol nodded. "Good, because what comes next is going to matter. When we land, the police are going to be there. They're going to want statements. They're going to want to talk to Maya, and they're going to want to talk to that man. You need to be ready." "I'm a pediatrician. I've treated children who've been through worse than this. I know how it works." "Good. Then you also know that men like him have lawyers who specialize in making things go away. Don't let them. Don't settle. Don't accept an apology. Make him face what he did." Diana looked at Carol with new eyes. "You sound like you've been through something like this before." Carol's expression tightened. "Not exactly like this, but close enough. A long time ago, someone hurt my granddaughter and I stayed quiet because I was told it would be handled. It wasn't handled. It was buried. I've spent 20 years regretting that silence. I won't make that mistake again." Diana reached across the aisle and took Carol's hand. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Please return your seats to the upright position and fasten your seatbelts. We'll be on the ground in approximately 20 minutes. Flight crew prepare for arrival." 20 minutes. Diana counted them in her head. 20 minutes until they were on the ground. 20 minutes until she could look Gerald Hutchins in the eye while handcuffs closed around his wrists. 20 minutes until her daughter could breathe again. Maya stirred. "Are we almost there, Mommy?" "Almost, baby, almost there. Will Grandma be waiting for us?" "She will. She made cookies just for you." Maya managed a small, tired smile. It was the first smile Diana had seen from her daughter in hours, and it nearly broke her all over again. The plane descended through the clouds, and the landing gear deployed with a mechanical thunk that vibrated through the floor. Diana tightened her arms around Maya and leaned back. She could feel her pulse in her temples, her wrists, the hollow of her throat. She was a woman made entirely of heartbeats and fury and love, and she was about to walk off this plane and burn Gerald Hutchins' world to the ground. The wheels touched the runway. The engines roared in reverse. The plane slowed, turned, and began taxiing toward the gate. And then something unexpected happened. The intercom crackled. Not the captain's voice this time. A different voice. A woman's voice. Calm, clear, and carrying an authority that silenced every conversation on the aircraft. "Good afternoon, passengers of Flight 2247. My name is Samantha Mitchell. I am the CEO of Continental Horizon Airlines." Every head turned. Every phone came up. Every person on that plane stopped breathing. "I am on this aircraft. I have been on this aircraft since Atlanta. I was seated in row 3, and I have been made aware of an incident that occurred during this flight. An adult male passenger physically struck a 6-year-old child, a child who was sleeping, a child who was ill, a child who posed no threat, no disruption, and no inconvenience to anyone." Diana's mouth fell open. She looked at Carol. Carol looked back at her with wide eyes. "I have also been made aware that when this child's mother called for help, the initial response from our crew was inadequate. She was told to keep her voice down. She was told to remain calm. She was not treated as the victim of a crime. She was treated as a disruption. That is unacceptable. That is a failure of this airline, and I take full personal responsibility for it." The cabin was so quiet that Diana could hear Maya's breathing against her chest. To the mother of the child who was harmed today, I want you to know that I see you, I hear you, and I am standing with you. What happened to your daughter will not be ignored. It will not be minimized. It will not be swept aside. When this aircraft reaches the gate, law enforcement will be waiting. The passenger who committed this assault will be removed and arrested, and every member of my crew who failed to protect your child will answer for that failure. Gerald Hutchins sat in the back row and heard every word. His face had gone gray. His hands were gripping the armrest so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. He was no longer thinking about his lawyer. He was no longer thinking about his reputation. He was thinking about the fact that the CEO of the airline was on this plane, had witnessed the aftermath, and had just announced his crime to every passenger on board. Samantha Mitchell continued, "To the rest of you, I want to say this. Continental Horizon Airlines exists to serve its passengers, all of its passengers. We failed today. I failed today. And I promise you on my name and on my career that this airline will do everything in its power to make this right. Thank you." The intercom went silent. For 2 full seconds, no one moved. Then Carol Whitman began to clap, slowly at first, her weathered hands coming together in steady, deliberate rhythm. The man who had spoken up earlier joined her. Then the woman across the row. Then the couple near the front. Then the entire cabin erupted into applause that shook the overhead bins and rattled the drink carts and filled the fuselage with a sound that was equal parts outrage and relief and something that sounded like justice. Diana sat in her seat and cried, not the tears of grief or anger that had been falling since Gerald struck her daughter. These were different. These were the tears of a woman who had stood alone in a hostile space and demanded to be heard, and had finally, against every expectation, been heard. Maya looked up at her mother with confusion. "Why is everyone clapping, Mommy?" Diana wiped her eyes and kissed her daughter's forehead. "Because sometimes, baby, when you stand up for what's right, the whole world stands up with you." The plane reached the gate. The seatbelt sign turned off, and through the small oval window, Diana could see them. 3 police officers standing on the jet bridge, their badges catching the fluorescent light, waiting. Gerald Hutchins was still sitting in the last row. He had not moved. He had not unbuckled his seatbelt. He sat perfectly still, his expensive suit wrinkled. Now his silk tie loosened his face the color of old paper. And for the first time since he had boarded this flight, Gerald Hutchins was afraid. The cabin door opened, and the officers stepped inside. The first officer through the cabin door was a woman. She was compact, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair, and a look on her face that said she had done this before and would do it again without hesitation. Her name tag read, Sergeant Diaz. Behind her stood 2 male officers, both younger, both scanning the cabin with trained eyes. Sergeant Diaz stopped at the front of the aisle and spoke loud enough for the nearest rows to hear. "I'm looking for the reporting party in an alleged assault on a minor. Can someone direct me?" "Kevin Briggs." The first officer stepped forward from the galley. "Sergeant, I'm First Officer Briggs. The victim is a 6-year-old girl seated in row 14 with her mother. The accused is an adult male passenger currently seated in the last row at the back of the aircraft. We have multiple witnesses." Sergeant Diaz nodded once. "Keep all passengers seated until I say otherwise." She turned to the 2 officers behind her. "Rodriguez, go to the back. Eyes on the suspect. Don't engage yet. Just stand there." She pointed to the other officer. "Tren, you're with me." Officer Rodriguez moved down the aisle with long, deliberate strides. Every passenger he passed turned to watch him go. Gerald Hutchins saw him coming from 20 rows away. He saw the badge, the belt, the holstered weapon, and something inside him caved. Not all the way. Not yet. But the first crack appeared in the wall of arrogance he had built around himself for 57 years. Sergeant Diaz walked to row 14 and knelt beside Diana's seat. Her voice dropped, shifting from command to something gentler, something practiced in dealing with victims. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Maria Diaz with Charlotte Mecklenburg Police. I understand your daughter was assaulted during this flight. Can you tell me what happened?" Diana had told this story 3 times already. To the first flight attendant who ignored her, to the lead attendant who minimized it, to Kevin Briggs who finally listened. Each time it got harder, not easier. Each retelling forced her to relive the moment, the sound of the slap, Maya's scream, the cold, empty look on Gerald's face when he said it was just a tap. She told it again, every word. And Sergeant Diaz listened without interrupting, her eyes steady, and focused, her hand resting lightly on the armrest, as though anchoring herself to Diana's pain. When Diana finished, Diaz said, "I need to see the injury." Diana gently lifted the blanket from Maya's legs. The bruise had deepened. What had been a red mark was now a mottled purple, the shape of a man's hand, unmistakable against the child's skin. Sergeant Diaz looked at it and her jaw tightened. She pulled out her phone. "I need to photograph this for evidence. Is that okay with you?" "Yes, do whatever you need to do." Diaz took 4 photographs from different angles, the flash casting sharp white light across Maya's legs. Maya flinched at each flash and pressed harder into Diana's chest. "Mommy, I don't like the pictures." "I know, baby. It's almost done. They need the pictures so the bad man gets in trouble." "Big trouble?" "The biggest trouble." Diaz put her phone away and turned to Carol Whitman across the aisle. "Ma'am, I understand you witnessed the incident." Carol straightened in her seat. "I saw everything. I was sitting right here the entire time. That man reached between the seats and struck that little girl's legs while she was sleeping. It was deliberate. It was forceful. And it was cruel." "Can you describe the force of the contact?" "It was a slap. Open-handed. Hard enough that I heard it clearly from across the aisle. Hard enough that the child woke up screaming. That is not a tap. That is not a pat. That is assault." Diaz wrote in a small notebook, her pen moving fast. "Did anyone else witness the incident?" The man from a few rows back raised his hand again. "I heard it. I didn't see the contact directly, but the sound was unmistakable, and I saw the aftermath. The child was hysterical. The mother was begging for help. The crew did nothing." "That's not entirely accurate," the lead flight attendant interjected from the galley entrance. "We responded as quickly as we could given the circumstances." Sergeant Diaz looked at her. "I'll take your statement separately, ma'am. For now, I need you to stay where you are." The lead attendant's mouth opened and closed. She retreated behind the curtain. Diaz stood and looked at Diana. "I'm going to speak with the accused now. I need you to stay here. Officer Tran will remain with you. If you need anything, tell him." Diana nodded. Officer Tran, a young man with kind eyes and a quiet manner, positioned himself at the end of Diana's row. He crouched down and looked at Maya. "Hey there, that's a cool rabbit you've got. Does he have a name?" Maya looked at him suspiciously, then held up the stuffed animal. "His name is Mr. Bumps." "Mr. Bumps. That's an awesome name. Does Mr. Bumps like flying?" "No, Mr. Bumps doesn't like flying, and I don't like flying either. Not anymore." Officer Tran's smile faltered, but he held it. "I'm sorry to hear that. But you know what, Mr. Bumps is lucky because he's got you to protect him. And your mom is protecting both of you." Maya looked up at Diana. "Mommy protects everybody. She's a doctor." "Is that right? Well, your mom sounds like a superhero to me." Maya considered this. "She doesn't have a cape." "The best superheroes never do." Diana mouthed a silent thank you to Officer Tran. He nodded and stood maintaining his position at the end of the row. At the back of the plane, Sergeant Diaz approached Gerald Hutchins. He was still seated, his arms crossed, his face locked in an expression that was trying very hard to be indignant, but was failing. Officer Rodriguez stood 2 feet away, saying nothing, his presence alone enough to pin Gerald to his seat. Diaz stopped directly in front of him. "Sir, I'm Sergeant Diaz. Are you the passenger who made physical contact with a 6-year-old child during this flight?" Gerald looked up at her. "I touched the kid's foot. That's it. The mother is blowing this way out of proportion." "Multiple witnesses say you slapped the child's legs. The child has a visible bruise consistent with a handprint. Would you like to revise your statement?" "I'm not revising anything. The kid was kicking my seat. I gave her a little tap. Any reasonable person would have done the same thing." "No reasonable person strikes a sleeping child, sir." "She wasn't sleeping. She was kicking. 3 witnesses say she was asleep. They're wrong." Diaz tilted her head slightly. "Sir, you have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you exercise that right. You are being placed under arrest for assault on a minor, which under federal law, given that this occurred on a commercial aircraft, carries additional penalties. Stand up, please." Gerald did not stand. "This is ridiculous. I'm calling my lawyer." "You can call your lawyer from the station. Stand up." "I'm not standing up until I talk to someone in charge. Where's the captain? I want to speak to the captain." The captain has already provided his statement, sir. He's cooperating fully. Now stand up, turn around, and place your hands behind your back." Gerald looked at Officer Rodriguez, then at Diaz, then at the rows of passengers still seated, still watching, still recording on their phones. He realized with a sensation like ice water filling his stomach that every person on this aircraft had just heard the CEO announce his crime, had just watched police officers walk down the aisle toward him, and was now watching him refuse to comply with law enforcement. The narrative he had constructed in his head, the one where he was the aggrieved party, the reasonable man pushed too far, collapsed like wet cardboard. He stood up. "Turn around." He turned. "Hands behind your back." He placed his hands behind his back and Sergeant Diaz cuffed him with practiced efficiency. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound on the aircraft. Gerald flinched at the cold metal against his wrists. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice shaking now. "I have connections. I know people. This is going to go away." "No, sir," Diaz said calmly. "It's not." She guided him down the aisle. Every row he passed, Gerald felt the stares. Some people looked at him with contempt, others with curiosity. One elderly man shook his head slowly. A woman in her 30s covered her child's eyes as though Gerald himself were something obscene. As they passed row 14, Gerald made the mistake of looking at Diana. She was holding Maya, her daughter's face buried in her neck, and she met Gerald's gaze with an expression that was not anger, not triumph. Something quieter than that, something more devastating. It was the look of a mother who had just watched the system work, who had watched a man who hurt her child be held accountable, who would carry the memory of this flight for the rest of her life, but would also carry the knowledge that she had not backed down. Gerald looked away first. They walked him off the plane through the jet bridge and into the terminal where 2 more officers were waiting. The passengers began to deplane behind him, filing past in a slow procession of rolling bags and murmured conversations. Several of them stopped to look at Gerald as he stood handcuffed between officers waiting to be processed. "That's him," someone whispered. "That's the guy who hit the little girl." "What kind of man hits a child? I hope they throw the book at him." Gerald heard every word. Each one landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through the armor he had spent a lifetime building. He was Gerald Hutchins, regional sales director, country club member, a man who tipped well at restaurants and always flew business class and had never been arrested for anything in his life. And now he was standing in handcuffs at Charlotte Douglas International Airport while strangers photographed him with their phones. Inside the jet bridge, Diana gathered their bags with trembling hands. Carol Whitman helped her pulling the carry-on from the overhead bin and handing Maya's coloring book to the child who clutched it against her chest alongside Mr. Bumps. "Let me give you my number," Carol said. "You're going to need witnesses, and I plan to be the loudest one." Diana managed a small laugh. "You've already been pretty loud." "Honey, you haven't seen loud yet. Wait until I'm in a courtroom." They exchanged numbers. Carol squeezed Diana's hand one more time, then gathered her own bags and headed up the jet bridge. Before she disappeared into the terminal, she turned back. "Diana, don't let anyone make you feel like you overreacted. A man hit your child. Everything you did was exactly right." Diana knotted her throat too tight for words. She carried Maya off the plane and into the terminal. Officer Tran walked beside her, guiding her toward a private room that the airport police had set up for victim statements. As they walked, Diana's phone buzzed. Her mother again. "Did you land? Are you here? I sent your brother to pick you up." Diana stopped walking. Her brother? James. She had forgotten that James lived in Charlotte now that Ruth had asked him to come get them at the airport. She typed quickly. "Landed. Something happened on the flight. Maya is okay, but I need to talk to you. We'll be a little late." Ruth's response came in seconds. "What happened? Is Maya hurt, Diana? Answer me right now." "She's okay, Mom. I promise. I'll explain everything. Just give me a little time." Diana put the phone away before Ruth could respond again. She could not handle her mother's fear on top of her own. Not right now. The private room was small and plain. Officer Tran offered Diana a chair, a bottle of water, and a juice box for Maya. Maya took the juice box and sat on Diana's lap, sipping slowly, her eyes darting to the door every few seconds, as though expecting Gerald to walk through it. Sergeant Diaz entered a few minutes later with a tablet and a digital recorder. She sat across from Diana and set both devices on the table. "I need a formal statement from you. It will be recorded. Take your time." Diana took a breath and began. She started from the beginning. The fever, the decision to fly, the airport, the boarding, Gerald's first complaint, his escalation, his threat, and then the slap. She described the sound, the force, the way Maya's body had jerked from sleep into terror, the red mark that had become a bruise, the flight crew's initial refusal to act, Kevin Briggs, Samantha Mitchell. When she finished, Diaz turned off the recorder and looked at Diana for a long moment. "Dr. Mercer, I want you to know something. I've been doing this job for 18 years. I've handled assaults domestics, everything you can imagine. What happened on that plane today is one of the most clear-cut cases I've ever seen. You have physical evidence, multiple corroborating witnesses, a first officer's testimony, and the CEO of the airline heard the aftermath personally. Gerald Hutchins is going to be charged. And given that this happened on a commercial aircraft, it falls under federal jurisdiction." What does that mean exactly? It means this isn't going to be a slap on the wrist, no pun intended. Federal assault charges, especially involving a minor, carry serious consequences. He's looking at significant fines and potentially prison time. Diana felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly, something deeper, validation. The confirmation that what happened was real, was wrong, and would not be dismissed. "What about the airline? The crew members who ignored me, that's between you and the airline. But given what their CEO said on that intercom, I think they're already ahead of you on that front." There was a knock at the door. Officer Tran opened it, and a woman stepped inside. She was tall, immaculately dressed, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that were simultaneously warm and unyielding. Diana recognized her voice before she even spoke. "Dr. Mercer, I'm Samantha Mitchell." Diana stared at her. On the intercom, Samantha had been a voice, an authority, an abstract concept of corporate power doing the right thing. In person, she was something else entirely. She was a woman who looked like she had not slept, whose mascara was slightly smudged, whose hands were clasped in front of her, not out of formality, but out of something that looked very much like anguish. "May I sit down?" Diana nodded. Samantha pulled a chair close and sat. She looked at Maya first, looked at her for a long time, then she looked at Diana. "I owe you an apology that is going to take much longer than a few minutes to deliver properly, but I want to start now if you'll let me." "I'm listening." "I was in row 3, first class. I had my noise-canceling headphones on because I was reviewing quarterly reports. I did not hear the initial confrontation. I did not hear your calls for help. I did not hear my crew fail you. It wasn't until First Officer Briggs contacted the cockpit, and the cockpit relayed the information to me through a crew member who recognized me, that I became aware of what had happened. By then, Mr. Hutchins had already been moved to the back of the plane. I went back and saw the bruise on your daughter's leg. I spoke with Carol Whitman. I spoke with the other witnesses. And then I went to the galley, and I listened to my crew explain why they thought telling a mother whose child had just been assaulted to keep her voice down was an acceptable response." Samantha paused. Her jaw tightened. "Their explanation was not satisfactory. It will never be satisfactory, and they will be held accountable." Diana's voice came out hoarse. "What are you going to do?" "The flight attendant who told you to be quiet has been suspended pending a full investigation. The lead attendant who suggested reseating you instead of the attacker has also been suspended. Every crew member on that flight will be interviewed, and any individual who witnessed or was aware of the assault and failed to take appropriate action will face consequences up to and including termination." "And what about us? What about Maya?" Samantha leaned forward. "Continental Horizon Airlines will cover all medical expenses related to Maya's treatment, both physical and psychological. We will provide you with legal support if you choose to pursue civil action against Mr. Hutchins. And I am personally going to ensure that your daughter never has to fear flying again." Maya looked up from her juice box. "I don't want to fly again. Flying is scary now." Samantha's composure cracked. Just for a moment. Just enough for Diana to see the woman behind the title. The mother, the grandmother, the human being who had just heard a 6-year-old say that a grown man had stolen her sense of safety at 30,000 feet. "Maya, can I tell you something?" Maya looked at her mother for permission. Diana nodded. "What?" Maya said cautiously. "I run the whole airline, every single airplane, and I promise you the next time you fly with us, I will personally make sure that your seat is the safest seat on the entire plane. And Mr. Bumps gets his own seat too." Maya clutched her rabbit tighter. "Mr. Bumps doesn't have a ticket. He doesn't need one. VIP rabbits fly free." Maya almost smiled. Almost. It was enough. Samantha stood and turned to Diana. She pulled a business card from her pocket and placed it on the table. "This is my direct line. Not the corporate office, not customer service, my phone. Call me anytime, day or night. Whatever you need, whatever Maya needs, I will make it happen." Diana took the card and looked at it. The CEO's personal cell phone number handwritten on the back. Why are you doing this? No CEO gets personally involved in something like this. Samantha met her eyes. "Because I have a daughter. She's 23 now, but when she was 6, she was exactly like Maya. And if someone had hit her on one of my planes and my crew had done nothing, I would have burned the entire company to the ground." She extended her hand. Diana took it. "I'm going to fix this, Dr. Mercer. Not just for Maya, for every passenger who has ever felt unsafe on one of my aircraft. This is going to change everything." Samantha walked out of the room. Diana sat in the silence she left behind, holding her daughter, holding the business card, holding the weight of everything that had happened and everything that was about to happen. Her phone buzzed again. Ruth. "James is at the terminal. Where are you? I'm worried sick. Call me." Diana looked at Maya. Maya looked at her with those glassy, feverish eyes that still held a trace of the fear Gerald Hutchins had planted in them. "Are we going to Grandma's now, Mommy?" "Yes, baby. We're going to Grandma's now." She gathered their bags, took her daughter's hand, and walked out of that room and into the terminal where her brother James was already running toward them, his face tight with concern, because Ruth had called him 7 times in the last 20 minutes and told him something was wrong. Something had happened on the plane, and he needed to find his sister and his niece right now. James reached them and dropped to one knee. "Diana, what happened? Mom is losing her mind. Are you okay? Is Maya okay?" Diana looked at her brother, at his worried eyes, at his hands gripping her shoulders, and she felt the wall she had built over the past 3 hours finally begin to crumble. She had been strong on the plane. She had been strong for the police. She had been strong in front of Samantha Mitchell. But here in her brother's arms with her daughter, safe, and the worst of it behind her, she did not need to be strong anymore. She broke. James caught her. He wrapped one arm around Diana and scooped Maya up with the other, holding both of them against his chest as Diana sobbed into his shoulder. Maya patted her mother's head with her small hand. "Don't cry, Mommy. The bad man is gone. The police lady took him." James looked at his niece over Diana's head. "What bad man, Maya? What police lady?" Maya held up Mr. Bumps. "A mean man hit me on the airplane, but Mommy yelled really loud, and the police came, and the airplane lady said he was bad, and they took him away in the silver bracelets." James's face changed. Diana had seen that look on her brother exactly twice before in her life. Once when a neighbor's dog had chased Maya down the street. Once when Diana's ex-husband had shown up at her apartment uninvited. It was the look of a man whose protective instincts had just detonated inside his chest. "Someone hit Maya on the plane. Diana, tell me everything." "Not here," Diana whispered. "At Mom's. I'll tell you everything at Mom's." James carried Maya to the car. Diana walked beside them, her hand on her daughter's back, her eyes scanning every face in the terminal out of a reflex she would carry for months. They loaded the bags. They buckled Maya into the back seat with Mr. Bumps and the coloring book and the thin blanket from the plane. James pulled out of the parking garage and onto the highway, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his jaw locked. "I'm going to need a name," he said quietly. "James. I need his name, Diana. His name is Gerald Hutchins. He's been arrested. The police have him. It's being handled. Is it because, from where I'm sitting, a grown man put his hands on my niece and he's still breathing, so I'm not sure it's being handled well enough? James, please. Not in front of Maya." James glanced in the rearview mirror. Maya was asleep, her head tilted against the window, Mr. Bumps wedged under her chin. He lowered his voice. "I'm sorry. Diana, if I had been on that plane... I know, but you weren't. And I handled it. And the CEO of the airline handled it. And the police handled it. And now we need to go see Mom and let Maya rest and figure out what comes next. James was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Mom is going to lose her mind. I know. No, Diana. You don't know. She's been pacing the house since you texted. She almost drove to the airport herself, on a replaced hip. I had to physically block the door. Despite everything, Diana almost smiled. That sounds like Mom. She's going to want blood. She's going to have to settle for justice. James pulled into the driveway of Ruth's small house. The front door was already open. Ruth Mercer stood in the doorway, leaning on a cane, her face a battlefield of worry and determination. She was 71 years old, 3 weeks out of surgery, and she looked like she was ready to march into that airport and arrest Gerald Hutchins herself. Diana got out of the car. Ruth's eyes locked on her immediately. Where is my grandbaby? She's asleep in the car. She's okay, Mom. She has a fever and a bruise, but she's okay. A bruise from what? Diana took a breath. A man on the plane hit her. Ruth's cane hit the ground with a crack. A man did what? Mom, please, let's get inside. I'll tell you everything. James lifted Maya from the back seat, still sleeping, and carried her into the house. Ruth watched them pass her hand, reaching out to brush Maya's hair as James walked by. Then she turned to Diana, and in her mother's eyes, Diana saw something she recognized from her own reflection in the airplane bathroom 4 hours ago. The look of a woman whose child had been hurt. The look that said someone was going to pay. Ruth grabbed Diana's arm with surprising strength. Tell me his name. Gerald Hutchins. And where is he now? In police custody. Good. Ruth's grip tightened. Because if he wasn't, I would find him myself, hip replacement or not. They went inside. James laid Maya on the couch and covered her with a quilt. Diana sat beside her daughter and told her mother everything. Ruth listened without interrupting, her hands gripping the top of her cane, her eyes growing darker with every sentence. When Diana reached the part about the flight attendant telling her to be quiet, Ruth closed her eyes and shook her head slowly. When she described Samantha Mitchell's announcement, Ruth opened her eyes and nodded once. When Diana finished, Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, that woman, the CEO, she did right by you. She did. But her crew didn't. No. And that man, he hit my grandbaby while she was sleeping, while she was sick, while she was doing nothing but being a child. Yes. Ruth looked at Maya on the couch. The child's face was flushed with fever, her legs tucked beneath the quilt, the bruise hidden but not healed. Ruth reached down and placed her hand on Maya's forehead, the same way she had done for Diana 30 years ago, the same way Diana had done for Maya that morning in the apartment. We're going to fight this, Ruth said, not just for Maya, for every mother who's ever been told to keep quiet while her child was being hurt. We're going to fight this until there's nothing left to fight. Diana took her mother's hand. 3 generations of women connected by blood and fury and an unbreakable refusal to be silenced. And somewhere across town, in a holding cell at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg police station, Gerald Hutchins sat on a metal bench and stared at the wall. His lawyer had been called. His wife had been notified. His boss had been informed. And for the first time in his life, Gerald Hutchins understood that money and connections and a pressed suit could not erase the sound of a child's scream from the memories of 163 witnesses. Gerald Hutchins's lawyer arrived at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg police station at 9:17 that evening. His name was Lawrence Keller, and he was the kind of attorney who wore handmade Italian shoes and billed $400 an hour and had never lost a case he considered worth winning. He walked through the station doors carrying a leather briefcase and a confidence that suggested he had already decided this would be resolved by morning. He was wrong. Sergeant Diaz met him in the corridor outside the holding area. She handed him a folder containing the preliminary incident report, the photographs of Maya's bruise, and the written statements from 3 witnesses, the first officer and the CEO of Continental Horizon Airlines. Lawrence opened the folder. He read the first page. His expression did not change. He read the second page. His expression still did not change. He reached the photograph of Maya's leg, the purple handprint stark against brown skin, and for the briefest moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Then he closed the folder and looked at Sergeant Diaz. "I'd like to see my client. Through there. You've got 30 minutes." Lawrence walked into the holding room and found Gerald sitting on the metal bench. His tie removed, his suit jacket folded beside him, his face drawn and gray. Gerald looked up when the door opened, and the relief that washed over him was almost pathetic. "Larry, thank God, get me out of here." Lawrence sat down across from him and set the folder on the table. "Tell me what happened, and Gerald, I need you to tell me the truth. Not your version, the truth." "I told the truth. The kid was kicking my seat. I tapped her foot. The mother went ballistic. Now I'm sitting in a holding cell like a common criminal." Lawrence opened the folder and slid the photograph across the table. "Does this look like a tap to you?" Gerald looked at the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. The bruise was undeniable. The shape of fingers was unmistakable. It was not the mark of a tap. It was not the mark of a gentle correction. It was the mark of a grown man's hand striking a child's skin with force. "Kids bruise easy," Gerald said. Lawrence leaned back. "Gerald, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. You are being charged with assault on a minor under federal jurisdiction because this occurred on a commercial aircraft. The maximum penalty is up to 20 years in federal prison. You have 3 eyewitnesses. You have photographic evidence. You have the first officer's testimony. And you have the CEO of the airline, who personally heard the aftermath and made a public announcement about it to 163 passengers, most of whom were recording on their phones. That announcement is already on the internet. I checked on the drive over. It has 400,000 views, and it was posted less than 3 hours ago." Gerald's face went from gray to white. 400,000! And climbing. Someone on that plane uploaded the audio of Samantha Mitchell's announcement before the wheels even stopped. The comments section is calling for your head. Your name is trending on social media. Your company's switchboard has been flooded with calls demanding your termination. And your wife called me twice on my way here crying. Gerald put his hands over his face. "This can't be happening." "It is happening, and here's what you need to understand. I can fight this. I can challenge the witnesses. I can argue that the force was minimal, that the bruise was pre-existing, that the mother was negligent for bringing a sick child on a plane. I can do all of that. But Gerald, I'm looking at that photograph, and I'm looking at 3 witness statements that are remarkably consistent, and I'm telling you as your lawyer, and as someone who has known you for 15 years, you did this, and a jury is going to know you did this." Gerald dropped his hands. His eyes were red. "So what do I do?" "Right now, nothing. You sit here tonight. Tomorrow morning, you'll be arraigned. I'll request bail. Given that you have no prior criminal record, bail will likely be granted, but the judge may impose conditions. Travel restrictions, no contact with the victim. You go home, you stay quiet, you do not talk to the press, you do not post on social media, you do not call anyone except me." "And then what?" "Then we figure out whether to fight this or negotiate a plea. But Gerald, I need you to understand something. Even if I get you the best deal possible, even if you avoid prison time, your life as you know it is over. Your name is out there. Your face will be out there by morning. You hit a 6-year-old girl on an airplane, and 163 people know it." Gerald stared at the wall. For the first time since he had boarded Flight 2247, he was not angry. He was not indignant. He was not constructing a narrative in which he was the victim. He was sitting in a holding cell in a wrinkled suit, looking at a photograph of a bruise he had inflicted on a child, and he was feeling something he had not felt in decades. He was feeling small. Lawrence stood. "I'll be back in the morning. Don't talk to anyone. Not the guards, not the other detainees, not anyone." "Larry." Lawrence stopped at the door. "Do you think I'm a bad person?" Lawrence looked at his client. At the man he had played golf with, shared dinners with, represented in 2 contract disputes and a fender-bender lawsuit. He thought about the photograph, the handprint, the 6-year-old girl who had been asleep. "I think you did a bad thing, Gerald. Whether that makes you a bad person is something you're going to have to figure out for yourself." He walked out and closed the door behind him. Across town, Diana could not sleep. Maya was in the guest bedroom at Ruth's house, tucked under a quilt that smelled like lavender and old books, her fever finally breaking her breathing deep and even for the first time in hours. Diana sat on the edge of the bed and watched her daughter sleep, and every time Maya moved, every time her foot twitched or her hand shifted, Diana's heart rate spiked and her muscles tensed, and she had to remind herself that they were safe. They were in Ruth's house. Gerald was in custody. No one was going to hurt Maya here. But her body did not believe it. Her body was still on that plane, still hearing the slap, still feeling Maya's scream vibrate through her chest, still watching a flight attendant tell her to keep her voice down while her daughter cried. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She picked it up. The screen showed 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and 91 email notifications. She scrolled through the texts. Friends, colleagues, people she had not spoken to in years, all of them asking the same thing. Was that you? Was that your daughter? Are you okay? She did not understand. How did they know? She opened her email and found the answer. Someone had forwarded her a link to a video. The title read, "Airline CEO calls out passenger who hit child mid-flight." Diana pressed play. The audio of Samantha Mitchell's intercom announcement played over a black screen with white text transcribing her words. The video had been uploaded by a passenger named at Traveling Tom and had been viewed over 1 million times. Diana's hands went cold. She kept scrolling. News outlets had picked up the story. Local Charlotte news, Atlanta stations, national wire services. The headlines were everywhere. CEO of Continental Horizon personally addresses mid-flight assault on child. Passenger arrested after striking 6-year-old on commercial flight. Mother's desperate pleas ignored by crew before CEO intervenes. And then she saw it, the headline that made her stop breathing. Gerald Hutchins identified as passenger who assaulted minor on Flight 2247. His name was public. His photograph was attached. And beneath the article, the comments section had erupted into a wildfire of outrage that was growing by the minute. Diana closed her phone and set it face down on the nightstand. She put her head in her hands and breathed. In and out, in and out. She was a pediatrician. She understood shock. She understood the way trauma reorganized the nervous system, the way it rewired the brain's threat detection to fire at shadows. She understood all of it intellectually. But understanding it did not stop her hands from shaking. Ruth appeared in the doorway. She was in her nightgown, leaning on her cane, her face soft in the hallway light. "You should be resting, Mom. Your hip." "My hip can wait. My daughter can't." Ruth lowered herself into the chair beside the bed with a grimace she tried to hide. "Talk to me." "It's everywhere, Mom. The video, the story, his name. My name isn't out there yet, but it will be. By tomorrow, everyone will know." "Let them know. Maya is 6 years old. I don't want her face on the news. I don't want her to become a symbol or a hashtag. I just want her to be a kid." Ruth reached over and placed her hand on Diana's knee. "Then we protect her, the way you've always protected her." "But Diana, what happened on that plane was not just about Maya. You know that. Every mother who has ever been ignored, dismissed, told to be quiet while her child was hurting, they deserve to know that someone fought back and won." "I didn't win, Mom. Not yet. You stood up in that aisle with your daughter in your arms and demanded justice from a system that was designed to shut you up. That's winning. Everything else is paperwork." Diana almost smiled. "When did you get so wise?" "Somewhere around the 3rd time I had to march into your principal's office and explain that my daughter had a right to speak her mind. You were 10. You told your teacher the textbook was wrong about the civil rights movement. Remember, I remember the teacher sent me to the office. And I remember walking into that office and telling the principal that if his teachers couldn't handle a 10-year-old who read more than they did, he had a staffing problem, not a discipline problem." Diana laughed, a real laugh. The first one since before the flight. It felt foreign in her chest, like a muscle she had forgotten how to use. "You raised me to fight," Diana said. "I raised you to stand. Fighting is just what happens when someone tries to make you sit down." They sat together in silence for a while, watching Maya sleep. Then Ruth said quietly, "What happens next?" "Sergeant Diaz said he'll be arraigned tomorrow morning, federal charges. His lawyer will probably get him bail." After that, it goes to trial unless he pleads. And the airline. Samantha Mitchell gave me her personal phone number. She promised to cover all medical expenses therapy for Maya legal support if we pursue civil action. We're pursuing civil action. Mom, don't mom me. That man put his hands on my grandbaby. The airline's crew watched it happen and told you to be quiet. If you think I'm going to sit in this chair and let that slide, you raised the wrong expectations. Diana looked at her mother, 71 years old, 3 weeks post-surgery, sitting in a chair at midnight with fire in her eyes and a cane she looked ready to use as a weapon. Diana realized not for the first time that she had learned everything she knew about strength from this woman. Okay, Mom, we'll pursue it. Good. Now go to sleep. You look terrible. Thanks, Mom. You're welcome. I love you. Now go. Diana lay down beside Maya and closed her eyes. Sleep came in fragments broken by dreams that were not quite nightmares, but were not peace either. She dreamed of the plane, of Gerald's hand reaching between the seats, of Maya's scream. But in the dream, the scream changed. It became a siren, and the siren became a phone ringing. Diana woke at 6:14 in the morning to her phone buzzing on the nightstand. She grabbed it, disoriented, her heart hammering. Hello? Dr. Mercer, this is Samantha Mitchell. I apologize for calling so early. I have something I need to tell you before it hits the news. Diana sat up. Maya was still sleeping beside her. What is it? Last night I convened an emergency meeting with my executive team and our board of directors. We reviewed the incident on Flight 2247 in its entirety. The cockpit recordings, the crew communications, the passenger statements, all of it. And 2 flight attendants have been terminated effective immediately. The first attendant who told you to keep your voice down and the lead attendant who suggested reseating you instead of the attacker. A 3rd crew member is under investigation for witnessing the assault and failing to report it. Diana's chest tightened. You did that overnight. Dr. Mercer, a man assaulted a child on my airline, and my crew responded by silencing the victim's mother. I was not going to wait for a committee review. I was not going to wait for a PR consultant to craft a response. Those crew members failed your daughter, and they failed every standard this airline claims to uphold. They are gone. Diana did not know what to say. She had spent 10 years in medicine, 10 years navigating systems that moved slowly and cautiously, and always erred on the side of protecting the institution. She had never seen accountability move this fast. There's more, Samantha continued. I am holding a press conference at 10 o'clock this morning. I will be making a public statement about what happened on Flight 2247, the actions we have taken, and the reforms we are implementing across the airline. I would like your permission to reference the incident without using your name or Maya's name. I want to protect your privacy while being transparent about what occurred. You're doing a press conference. I don't have a choice, Dr. Mercer. The video of my announcement has been viewed over 8 million times. Every major news outlet in the country is calling my office. If I don't get ahead of this story, someone else will tell it for me and they won't get it right. Diana looked at Maya still sleeping, her small chest rising and falling beneath the quilt. Don't use our names. Don't describe Maya in any way that could identify her. She's a child, not a news story. I give you my word. No names, no identifying details. This press conference will be about the airline's failures and the airline's response, not about your family. Then you have my permission. Thank you. And Dr. Mercer, one more thing. I've retained an independent law firm to conduct a full review of our crew training protocols, our in-flight response procedures, and our handling of passenger safety incidents. This review will be made public. Every finding, every recommendation, no redactions. Why are you telling me this? Samantha was quiet for a moment. Because you deserve to know that what happened to Maya is going to change things. Not in 6 months, not after a lawsuit forces our hand. Now, today, I want you to know that your daughter's pain is not going to be wasted. Diana closed her eyes. Thank you, Samantha. Don't thank me. Hold me accountable. That's what I need from you. The call ended. Diana sat in the early morning light, her phone in her lap, her daughter beside her, and felt the ground shifting beneath a story that had begun with a man's hand and a child's scream, and was now growing into something much larger than any of them had imagined. By 9:30, the press conference was all anyone could talk about. Carol Whitman called Diana from her hotel room. Turn on the news. Every channel. They're all talking about it. I know, Samantha Mitchell called me this morning. She called you personally? She called me at 6 in the morning to tell me she fired 2 crew members overnight and is holding a press conference at 10. Carol whistled. That woman doesn't play around. I like her. Carol, I need to ask you something. Are you really willing to testify if this goes to trial? Honey, I already called the district attorney's office this morning, gave them my name, my contact information, and told them I would fly back to Charlotte on my own dime as many times as they needed me. That man hit a sleeping child. I will stand in front of any judge in this country and say exactly what I saw. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. 20 years ago, I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. I told you about my granddaughter. What I didn't tell you is that the man who hurt her never faced consequences because nobody would testify. Nobody wanted to get involved. Nobody wanted to make a scene. I swore on my granddaughter's tears that I would never be that person again. So yes, Diana, I do have to do this. Diana's throat tightened. Thank you, Carol. Stop thanking me and start preparing. That man's lawyer is going to try to make this go away. Don't let him. At 10 o'clock, Samantha Mitchell stood behind a podium in the Continental Horizon Airlines headquarters. Diana watched the live stream on her phone from Ruth's living room. James sat beside her. Ruth sat in her chair, leaning forward on her cane, her eyes fixed on the screen. Samantha looked directly into the cameras. She did not read from a teleprompter. She did not glance at notes. She spoke from memory, from conviction, from the place inside her that had broken open when she heard Maya say she did not want to fly anymore. She described the incident without naming Diana or Maya. She described the crew's failure. She announced the terminations. She announced the independent review. She announced a new airline-wide training program focused on passenger safety crew intervention protocols and the protection of vulnerable passengers, including children, elderly travelers, and passengers with disabilities. She announced a partnership with a national child advocacy organization. And then she said something that made Ruth Mercer grip her cane so hard, her knuckles turned white. I want to speak directly to the mother of the child who was harmed. I know you are watching. I want you to know that your courage saved more than your daughter. Your refusal to be silenced exposed failures in this airline that have existed for too long. You demanded better, and you were right to demand it. Continental Horizon Airlines will be better because of you. Not because of our board, not because of our shareholders, because of a mother who would not sit down. Ruth looked at Diana. Diana looked at Ruth. Neither of them spoke. On the screen, a reporter raised her hand. Ms. Mitchell, there are reports that the passenger who committed the assault, Gerald Hutchins, is claiming the contact was minimal and that the mother overreacted. How do you respond? Samantha's expression did not waver. I have seen the photographs of the child's injury. I have read the witness statements. I have spoken with the first officer who assessed the situation in real time. The evidence is unambiguous. A grown man struck a sleeping sick child with enough force to leave a visible bruise in the shape of his hand. That is not minimal contact. That is assault. And the suggestion that a mother defending her child is overreacting is precisely the kind of dismissal that allowed this to happen in the first place. James leaned forward. I like this woman. Ruth nodded slowly. She's doing what needs to be done. Another reporter spoke up. Will Continental Horizon Airlines be pursuing any action against Mr. Hutchins? We are banning Mr. Hutchins from all Continental Horizon flights permanently. We are also cooperating fully with federal law enforcement in their criminal investigation. Beyond that, the legal proceedings are between Mr. Hutchins and the justice system. What I can tell you is that this airline will stand behind the victim and her family with every resource at our disposal. The press conference lasted another 20 minutes. Samantha answered every question. She did not dodge. She did not deflect. She did not hide behind corporate language or legal disclaimers. She spoke like a human being who was furious and determined and willing to stake her career on doing the right thing. When it was over, Diana turned off her phone and sat in silence. Maya had woken up during the broadcast and was sitting on Ruth's lap eating cookies and showing Mr. Bumps the TV. Mommy, why is the airplane lady on TV? She's telling people about what happened on our plane. Is she telling them about the bad man? Yes, baby. She's telling everyone. Good. Everyone should know he's bad. Ruth kissed the top of Maya's head. From the mouths of babes. Diana's phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was a number she did not recognize with a Charlotte area code. Hello, Dr. Mercer. My name is Patricia Langford. I'm an attorney with Langford and Associates. I specialize in civil rights and personal injury cases involving children. I watched the press conference this morning, and I'd like to offer my services to you and your daughter, pro bono. Diana blinked. Pro bono? Free of charge. No fees. No percentage. What happened to your daughter is a case I would take on principle alone. A man assaulted a child. An airline's crew failed to intervene. The evidence is overwhelming. And frankly, Dr. Mercer cases like this are why I became a lawyer. Diana looked at Ruth. Ruth was watching her with raised eyebrows, mouthing, "Who is it? Ms. Langford, can I call you back? I need to discuss this with my family." "Of course. Take all the time you need. But Dr. Mercer, I want you to know something. Gerald Hutchins' lawyer is Lawrence Keller. I know Lawrence. He's good. Very good. And his strategy is going to be to make this quiet, to negotiate behind closed doors, to offer you money in exchange for silence. Don't let him. What happened to Maya deserves to be heard in open court, where a jury can see that photograph and decide for themselves." Diana's grip on the phone tightened. "I'll call you back today." She hung up and looked at her family, her mother, her brother, her daughter, all of them watching her waiting. "A lawyer wants to represent us, pro bono. She says Gerald's attorney is going to try to settle quietly." Ruth straightened in her chair. "Then we don't settle quietly." James nodded. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." Maya looked up from her cookies. "What's pro bono? It means free baby." "Oh, I like free. Can I have more cookies?" Ruth handed her another cookie. "You can have as many cookies as you want, sweetheart." Diana looked at her daughter's legs, at the bruise that was turning from purple to yellow, at the edges, at the fading outline of Gerald Hutchins's hand on her child's skin. She thought about what Carol had said. Don't settle. Don't accept an apology. Make him face what he did. She thought about what Patricia Langford had said. What happened to Maya deserves to be heard in open court. She thought about Samantha Mitchell standing behind that podium, refusing to hide, refusing to minimize, refusing to protect a system at the expense of a child, and she made her decision. She picked up her phone and called Patricia Langford back. The attorney answered on the first ring. "Ms. Langford, my name is Diana Mercer, and I want to tell you about my daughter." Patricia Langford worked fast. Within 48 hours of that phone call, she had filed a civil suit against Gerald Hutchins for assault and battery on a minor, a separate civil suit against Continental Horizon Airlines for negligent failure to protect a passenger, and a formal victim impact statement with the federal prosecutor's office handling the criminal case. She called Diana on the third morning with an update that changed everything. "Gerald Hutchins's lawyer just contacted me. Lawrence Keller. He wants to meet." Diana was sitting at Ruth's kitchen table watching Maya color at the other end. The bruise on her daughter's leg had shifted from purple to a sickly green-yellow, and Maya had started wearing long pants, even though it was warm outside, because she did not want to look at it. What does he want? What they always want. To make it go away. He's going to offer you money, a lot of money, and in exchange he'll want a non-disclosure agreement, a public statement from you saying the incident was a misunderstanding, and the withdrawal of the civil suit. And the criminal charges. He can't touch those. The criminal case is between Gerald and the federal government, but if you sign an NDA and publicly downplay what happened, it weakens the prosecution's case. Juries pay attention to what victims say publicly. If you call it a misunderstanding, a defense attorney can use that. Diana's jaw tightened. So he wants to buy my silence to help him beat the criminal charges. That's exactly what he wants. How much? He hasn't named a figure yet, but based on similar cases, I'd expect somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000. Diana looked at Maya. Her daughter was drawing a picture of an airplane, but in the drawing, the airplane had no people inside it. It was empty. Flying through an empty sky with no passengers, no crew, no one at all. Diana stared at that drawing and felt something harden inside her chest. "Set the meeting. I want to look Lawrence Keller in the eye when I tell him no." Patricia paused. "Are you sure?" "Because once you reject the offer, things accelerate. They'll prepare for trial. It gets public. It gets ugly. They'll scrutinize your life, your career, your parenting. They'll look for anything they can use. Let them look. I have nothing to hide, and neither does Maya. Then we meet tomorrow, my office, 10 o'clock. Diana hung up and looked at her mother, who had been listening from the doorway. You heard. Ruth nodded. Every word. He's going to offer me money to say it didn't happen. And you're going to take that money and shove it so far down his lawyer's throat he chokes on it. Mom, what, I'm 71, I can say whatever I want. The meeting took place the following morning. Diana sat on one side of the conference table with Patricia Langford. Lawrence Keller sat on the other side alone. Gerald was not present. Lawrence had advised him to stay away, and for once Gerald had listened. Lawrence opened with pleasantries. He complimented Patricia on her reputation. He expressed sympathy for what Diana and Maya had been through. He used words like unfortunate and regrettable and deeply sorry. He was polished and articulate and entirely sincere in his insincerity. Then he got to the point. Dr. Mercer, my client, recognizes that his actions were inappropriate. He is prepared to offer a settlement of $350,000, along with a written apology, in exchange for the withdrawal of the civil suit and a mutual non-disclosure agreement. Patricia started to respond, but Diana spoke first. No, Lawrence blinked. Dr. Mercer, I understand this is emotional, but I'd encourage you to consider the offer carefully. $350,000 is a significant sum, and it would provide for Maya's care and therapy without the stress and exposure of a public trial. Your client slapped my sleeping daughter hard enough to leave his handprint on her skin. My daughter is afraid to fly. She's afraid of men she doesn't know. She wakes up at night crying because she dreams about a stranger hitting her. And you're sitting here offering me money to pretend it didn't happen. I'm offering a resolution that benefits everyone. It benefits your client. It does not benefit my daughter. My daughter benefits from seeing the man who hurt her face the consequences of what he did, in public, in a courtroom, where a judge and a jury can look at the photograph of her bruise and decide for themselves what happened. Lawrence leaned back. Dr. Mercer, I want to be straightforward with you. If this goes to trial, my job is to defend Gerald Hutchins. That means cross-examining you, cross-examining witnesses, and presenting an alternative narrative. I don't want to do that. I don't think anyone wants that. A settlement is the cleanest path forward for everyone. The cleanest path forward for your client, not for mine. Patricia Langford spoke for the first time. My client is not interested in clean. My client is interested in accountability. We reject the offer. Lawrence looked at Diana one more time. Are you certain? I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Lawrence gathered his papers, closed his briefcase, and stood. Then I'll see you in court. He walked out. Patricia turned to Diana with something between admiration and concern. You know this means war. Good. I've been at war since that man's hand touched my daughter. The trial began 7 weeks later in the United States District Court for the Western District of North Carolina. The criminal case went first. Federal prosecutors charged Gerald Hutchins with 1 count of assault resulting in bodily injury to a minor, a federal offense, carrying a maximum sentence of 10 years imprisonment and a fine of up to $250,000. The courtroom was full, not just with reporters and legal observers, but with mothers, dozens of them, women who had read about the case online, who had seen Samantha Mitchell's press conference, who had recognized something in Diana Mercer's story that resonated with their own experiences. They filled the gallery and overflowed into the hallway, and every single one of them was watching. The prosecution opened with the photograph. It was projected on a screen large enough for every person in the courtroom to see. Maya's leg, the bruise, the handprint. The prosecutor, a woman named Claire Dawson, stood beside the image and let it speak for itself for 10 full seconds before she said a word. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is the leg of a 6-year-old girl named Maya Mercer. She was asleep on a commercial flight running a fever, clutching a stuffed rabbit. She was not kicking anyone's seat. She was not making noise. She was not causing a disturbance. She was a sick child sleeping against her mother's shoulder. And the defendant, Gerald Hutchins, a grown man weighing 210 pounds, reached between the seats and struck her. Lawrence Keller's defense was exactly what Patricia had predicted. He argued that the contact was minimal, that Diana had overreacted, that the bruise could have been pre-existing, that the witnesses were biased by the emotional environment of the cabin. Then the prosecution called Carol Whitman. Carol walked to the witness stand with the posture of a woman who had waited 20 years for this moment. She took the oath, sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and looked directly at the jury. Claire Dawson approached. "Ms. Whitman, can you describe what you witnessed on Flight 2247? I was seated directly across the aisle from the victim and her mother. I had a clear, unobstructed view. The child was asleep. She had been asleep for some time. At one point, her foot twitched in her sleep and barely grazed the seat pocket. The defendant reached forward between the seats and slapped the child's legs with an open hand. The sound was sharp and loud. The child woke up screaming. In your judgment, was this a tap, a pat, or a slap? It was a slap. There is no ambiguity. I have raised 3 children, and I have 7 grandchildren. I know the difference between a gentle correction and a violent strike. What I saw was violent. Lawrence stood for cross-examination. Ms. Whitman, you said the child's foot grazed the seat pocket. Isn't it possible that what you interpreted as a slap was actually the defendant pushing the child's foot away from his personal space? Carol looked at him with the steady gaze of a woman who had spent 20 years regretting her silence and would not be shaken now. No, sir, it is not possible. Pushing a foot away involves the foot. What your client did involved the child's legs. He reached over and he struck down. I watched his arm move, I watched his hand make contact, and I heard a 6-year-old girl scream in pain and terror. That is not a push, that is an assault. Lawrence tried 2 more angles. Carol shut down each one with the same calm, devastating precision. By the time she stepped down from the stand, 3 members of the jury were no longer looking at Gerald Hutchins. They were looking at their own hands. The prosecution called Diana next. She told her story one final time. The fever, the flight, Gerald's escalating hostility. The threat, the slap, the crew's failure, the pleas for help that went unanswered. She spoke without notes, without rehearsal, without the careful composure she had maintained on the plane and at the police station, and in Patricia Langford's office. She spoke like a mother. When she described the moment Gerald's hand struck Maya's legs, her voice broke. She did not try to hold it together. She let the courtroom hear what it sounded like when a mother relived the worst moment of her life. My daughter was asleep. She was sick. She was dreaming. And a stranger reached out and hit her. She woke up screaming, and she looked at me, and she asked Mommy, why did the man hurt me? And I did not have an answer. I still do not have an answer. Because there is no answer. There is no reason that justifies a grown man striking a sleeping child. The courtroom was silent. One juror wiped her eyes. Another stared at Gerald Hutchins with an expression that suggested the verdict had already formed in his mind. Lawrence's cross-examination of Diana was brief. He asked her why she had brought a sick child on a plane. Diana answered that she was a pediatrician and had assessed her daughter's condition as safe for travel. He asked if Maya had been restless during the flight. Diana answered that her daughter had a fever and had shifted in her sleep the way any sick child would. He asked if Diana had attempted to prevent Maya's foot from touching Gerald's seat. Diana answered that she had repeatedly and that Maya's final movement had occurred while Diana briefly loosened her protective hold. Lawrence had nothing else. He sat down. The defense called Gerald Hutchins to the stand. Lawrence had advised against it, but Gerald insisted. He still believed he could talk his way out of this. He still believed that if he could just explain himself, if he could just make the jury understand how annoying the child had been, they would see his side. He was wrong. Gerald took the stand and immediately began minimizing. He called it a tap. He called it a reflex. He said the child had been kicking relentlessly and that the mother had done nothing. He said he had asked politely and been ignored. He said any reasonable person would have been frustrated. Claire Dawson stood for cross-examination with the photograph in her hand. Mr. Hutchins, you say you tapped the child. Is that correct? Yes, a light tap. Can you show the jury using this table the amount of force you used when you tapped the child? Gerald hesitated. Then he reached forward and lightly touched the table with his fingertips. It was barely audible. That's the force you used, approximately. Claire held up the photograph. Mr. Hutchins, this bruise on the child's leg is 4 inches long and 2 inches wide. It is in the shape of an adult male hand. It was visible for 11 days. Are you telling this jury that the force you just demonstrated on this table produced this injury? Gerald stared at the photograph. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Mr. Hutchins, kids bruise easily. Children bruise easily. That is your explanation. I didn't mean to hurt her. Claire lowered the photograph. You didn't mean to hurt her, but you did hurt her. You hurt a 6-year-old girl who was asleep, who was sick, who had done nothing to you except exist in the seat in front of you. And then you told her mother it was her fault. And then you told the flight crew it was just a tap. And now you're telling this jury that children bruise easily. I'm telling the truth. The truth, Mr. Hutchins, is in this photograph, and no amount of minimizing is going to erase it. Gerald stepped down from the stand. His face was gray. His hands were trembling. For the first time in the entire trial, he did not look angry. He looked defeated. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 43 minutes. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty. The courtroom erupted. The mothers in the gallery rose to their feet. Diana covered her mouth with both hands and bent forward, her shoulders shaking. Patricia Langford put her arm around her. Ruth, seated in the front row with James and Maya, gripped her cane and closed her eyes and whispered something that only she and God could hear. Gerald Hutchins stood motionless as the verdict was read. His wife, who had come to court every day, who had sat behind him in the gallery with her head down, let out a single sob and then went silent. Lawrence Keller placed his hand on Gerald's shoulder and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The judge scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks later. Gerald faced up to 10 years in federal prison. Lawrence would argue for leniency. The prosecution would argue for the maximum. But the criminal case was only half the story. The civil trial against Continental Horizon Airlines began 2 weeks after Gerald's conviction. Patricia Langford presented a devastating case. She called every crew member who had been on Flight 2247. She called Kevin Briggs. She called Samantha Mitchell. She introduced the airline's own internal communications, showing that crew training on passenger safety interventions had been flagged as inadequate 3 separate times in the previous 2 years. And each time the recommendation for additional training had been rejected due to budget concerns. Samantha Mitchell testified voluntarily. She did not attempt to defend the airline's failures. She described in blunt and unflinching detail what she had learned about her own company's shortcomings. She described the terminations, the independent review, the new training protocols. And then she said something that no CEO in the history of corporate litigation had ever said on a witness stand. We failed, not because we lacked policies, but because we lacked the culture to enforce them. A child was assaulted on my aircraft, and my crew's first instinct was to silence the victim, not to protect her. That is a systemic failure. It is my failure, and I accept full responsibility. Patricia looked at the jury after Samantha stepped down. Every face was stone. Not with anger toward Samantha, who had clearly done everything in her power to make things right, but with the cold clarity of 12 people who understood that accountability and remorse, while admirable, did not erase the fact that a child had been hurt because a system had broken down. The jury awarded Diana Mercer $2.4 million in damages, $1 million for Maya's pain and suffering, $800,000 for emotional distress and ongoing therapy, $600,000 in punitive damages against the airline for its crew's negligent response. Samantha Mitchell called Diana that evening. I'm not going to appeal. The airline will pay in full, and the reforms we've implemented will remain permanent regardless of the financial cost. Diana thanked her. Then she said, Maya drew another picture today. What was it? An airplane, but this time it had people in it. She drew herself in the window seat. She drew Mr. Bumps in the seat next to her. And she drew a woman in the front of the plane with a sign that said safe. Samantha was quiet for a long time. That might be the most meaningful performance review I've ever received. 3 weeks later, Gerald Hutchins was sentenced. The judge, after reviewing the evidence, the victim impact statements, and the letters submitted by Diana Carroll and 7 other passengers from Flight 2247, imposed a sentence of 3 years in federal prison, 5 years of supervised probation, mandatory anger management counseling, a permanent no-fly order on all commercial airlines, and a fine of $100,000. Gerald stood in the courtroom and heard the sentence and said nothing. His wife did not come to sentencing. His lawyer stood beside him and said nothing. The gallery was full again, full of the mothers who had come to the trial and who had returned for this moment, and when the judge announced the sentence, they did not clap. They did not cheer. They sat in silence. Because this was not a celebration. This was a reckoning. After the sentencing, Diana walked out of the courthouse with Maya holding one hand and Ruth holding the other. James walked behind them carrying Mr. Bumps because Maya's arms were tired. Carol Whitman was waiting at the bottom of the steps. She had flown to Charlotte one last time on her own dime, just as she had promised. "It's done," Carol said. "It's done," Diana replied. Carol knelt down and looked at Maya. "How do you feel, sweetheart?" Maya thought about it. She thought about it the way a 6-year-old thinks about things, with the total seriousness and absolute honesty that adults spend their entire lives trying to recover. "I feel brave," Maya said. Carol smiled. "You are brave. The bravest. Mommy's braver. You're both brave." Maya looked at her mother. "Mommy, can we go home now?" Diana looked at Ruth. Ruth nodded. "Yes, baby, we can go home." They drove to the airport. Diana carried Maya through the terminal, past the gates and the crowds and the departure boards, and for the first time since Flight 2247, Maya did not flinch. She did not press against Diana's side. She did not ask to leave. She looked around with wide, curious eyes, the eyes of a child who was learning slowly and painfully and bravely that the world could hurt you and that you could survive it. They boarded the plane, a Continental Horizon flight, because Samantha Mitchell had personally arranged it. Their seats were in the first row. The flight attendant greeted them by name and handed Maya a pair of golden wings and a card that read, "For the bravest passenger we've ever had." Maya pinned the wings to Mr. Bumps. The plane took off. Maya sat by the window and watched the clouds and did not fall asleep. She stayed awake the entire flight, her eyes wide open, her hand in her mother's hand, watching the world grow small beneath her. When they landed in Atlanta, Diana carried Maya through the terminal and out into the afternoon sun. She set her daughter down on the curb and knelt in front of her. "You okay, baby?" Maya looked at her mother with those bright, fierce, unbreakable eyes. "I'm okay, Mommy." The airplane was safe. Diana pulled her daughter into her arms and held her so tight that the whole world narrowed to the sound of Maya's heartbeat and the warmth of her small body and the knowledge absolute and unshakable that she had fought for this child and she had won. Some fights are not about revenge. They are not about money. They are not about making headlines or winning verdicts or watching powerful men fall. Some fights are about one thing and one thing only. A mother looked at her daughter and said, "No one will ever hurt you without answering for it," and then she stood up and made the whole world keep that promise.